You'll find yourself wanting to help others after hearing this story. It's about a young teen who, on his way home from school, encounters a homeless veteran living in a van. What happens next? Well, let's just say this story will change both their lives. But before we dive into the story, take a moment to subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one. And let's be real, there shouldn't even be a term like homeless veteran. Our government can and should do more for these brave souls. Now let's dive into the story of how one teen changed a veteran's life forever. Every morning on his way to school, Jamal noticed the same old gray van parked in the grocery store parking lot across the street. It never moved. It looked abandoned, beaten down by years of rust and rain. But Jamal always felt like it was watching him. The strange part was, it wasn't just there some days. It was there every day. Same spot, same position. Eventually, curiosity won. He slowed his steps, squinting to see inside. That's when he saw him. Inside the van was a man, maybe in his late 50s or 60s. His beard was thick and gray, his eyes hidden behind tired lids. He sat still, barely moving. Some days, Jamal saw the man reading a worn-out book. Other days, he just stared ahead, expressionless. People walked by all the time. Nobody looked, nobody cared. But Jamal couldn't ignore him. One morning, something changed. The man looked back. Their eyes met. Jamal froze. There was something deeply sad but strong in those eyes. Like he'd been through hell but refused to be broken. That moment haunted Jamal the rest of the day. He asked around, but no one knew anything about the man in the van. His teachers, the store owner, even his friends just shrugged. Probably just another homeless guy, they said. But Jamal felt something else. That man didn't seem lost. He seemed stuck. Like life had hit pause. The next day, Jamal packed 2 sandwiches instead of 1. And as he walked past the van, he slowed, then stopped. He stepped forward, heart racing, and gently tapped on the glass. The window rolled down an inch. A husky voice asked, "Yeah? Hey, I brought you this," Jamal said, holding out the sandwich. The man looked at it, then at Jamal, then back at the sandwich. He slowly opened the door and took it. "Thanks," he muttered. "I'm Jamal. What's your name?" The man hesitated, then said quietly, "Call me Mr. Ray." From that day forward, Jamal never walked past the van without checking on Mr. Ray. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to unravel a story deeper than he could have imagined. A story of war, loss, and the power of one kind gesture to change everything. Most people passed that old gray van without a second glance. It was parked behind the grocery store, tucked near a dumpster like it didn't belong anywhere else. But for 17-year-old Mason, something about that van pulled at him. He couldn't explain it. Each time he walked home from school, he noticed the same worn-down tires, the fogged windows, and that familiar shape of a man hunched behind the steering wheel. The man barely moved, except to crack the window or sip from a bottle of water. He looked tired, really tired, and cold. Mason's friends joked that it was some creepy guy, maybe dangerous. They crossed the street when they saw the van, but Mason didn't. Something told him this man wasn't a threat. He was hurting. One rainy afternoon, Mason made a decision. He went back to the store and bought a hot sandwich, some fruit, and a bottle of water. It wasn't much, but it felt right. He knocked on the van window, a little nervous. The glass slid down just a crack, and 2 tired eyes looked out. "You okay, sir? I brought you something." There was a pause. Then the window rolled down more. The man's hands were trembling as he reached out. Not just from the cold, but maybe from surprise. "Thank you, son," he said quietly. "No one's spoken to me in days." Mason smiled gently. "I see you here a lot." "My name's Mason," the man nodded slowly. "I'm Ray. Ray didn't say much else, but he accepted the food with a quiet gratitude that hit Mason deep in the chest. There was something in Ray's voice, a weight, a story untold. And Mason knew he couldn't just walk away. He didn't know Ray had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He didn't know Ray lost his wife while overseas, or that PTSD had taken nearly everything from him, including his home. But Mason was about to learn all of it. And soon, he'd do something that no one, not even Ray, could have expected. The days went by, but Mason couldn't shake the image of Ray in that van. Every time he passed by, he felt a tug in his chest, like something was calling him to do more, to help. Mason came back the next afternoon. He didn't bring food this time. He just stopped and leaned against the van, watching Ray. Ray was sitting in the front seat, staring out at nothing, his hands folded tightly in his lap. After a few seconds of hesitation, Mason spoke. "Are you okay, Ray?" Ray's eyes snapped to him. There was a flicker of something there. Maybe fear, maybe something else. He didn't answer at first. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. Mason noticed the pile of empty cans on the floor of the van and the faded military jacket hanging from the seat. There were worn-out boots by the door, and the smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. "You're a vet, aren't you?" Mason asked gently, keeping his voice steady. Ray nodded. A long, quiet sigh escaped his lips. "2 tours in Afghanistan. Lost my wife while I was over there. Came back to nothing. Just nothing." Mason didn't know what to say. Words seemed so small compared to the pain Ray had been carrying. He just stayed there, standing in front of the van, letting Ray speak, or not speak. He let the silence stretch, knowing it wasn't easy for Ray to open up. "I'm sorry," Mason finally said. He didn't know what else to offer, but he felt the weight of Ray's story. Ray smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't need to apologize. You're just a kid." "No," Mason shook his head. I think we're all just people, you know?" Ray looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "You're the first person who's seen me as a person in a long time." Mason's heart tightened. He knew that wasn't just a line. Ray had been forgotten by the world, by everyone, but Mason wasn't going to forget. And as he looked at Ray's tired eyes, he promised himself he would find a way to change things. Somehow, he would help. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mason couldn't stop thinking about Ray. Every time he passed the old van, his heart sank. Ray wasn't just another person living on the streets. He was a man with a story, a man who had given so much, only to return to nothing. But Mason wasn't going to let that be the end of the story. Mason didn't have much, but he had an idea. He started talking to his friends, telling them about Ray and the condition he was living in. It wasn't long before his friends started to care too. They pitched in what they could: money, food, and small items like socks and blankets. But Mason knew that wasn't enough. Ray needed something bigger than that. One evening, Mason sat in his room staring at his computer screen. The thought kept racing through his mind. How can I help Ray get back on his feet? And then it hit him. What if Ray didn't have to stay in that van? What if he could get back on his feet, start fresh? What if Mason could help him find a place to stay, a job, a new beginning? The idea seemed impossible, but Mason wasn't about to let that stop him. He had to try. The first step? A fundraiser. Mason set up an online campaign sharing Ray's story. It wasn't just about the money. It was about getting people to care. He wrote a simple post. "A homeless vet needs your help. Ray served our country, and now he's fallen on hard times. Let's give him a second chance." Mason's friends shared the post, and before long, it started spreading. Strangers reached out, offering support. A local veterans organization saw the post and contacted Mason. They were eager to help. They offered to pay for Ray's medical bills, and they even connected Mason to some job opportunities for Ray. Mason felt the weight of his small but growing community's support. It was something bigger than just him now. It was a movement, small but powerful. It was the first step toward changing Ray's life. A week later, Mason approached Ray again, this time with a piece of hope in his hands. "Ray," he said, "I've got something for you." Ray looked at him, still skeptical. But when Mason told him about the fundraiser and the support they'd received, Ray's expression changed. For the first time, there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. Hope. Ray shook his head slowly as if he couldn't believe it. This can't be real." "It is," Mason said, smiling. "You're not alone in this anymore. There's a whole group of people out there ready to help. You're gonna get through this." Ray's lips trembled as he finally spoke, barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say." Mason placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say anything. Just let us help." Ray nodded, tears brimming in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. The days following Mason's conversation with Ray felt like a whirlwind of activity. The online fundraiser had gained more traction than Mason ever expected. More people were donating, and the local veterans organization was working hard to connect Ray with the resources he needed to rebuild his life. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about restoring Ray's dignity and giving him a second chance. The first major step came when Ray agreed to go to the veterans' shelter. Mason drove him there one afternoon, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as they crossed town. Ray sat beside him, his eyes focused on the road ahead, but there was a quiet sense of unease in his posture. He was still adjusting to the idea that people were helping him. For so long, Ray had been used to taking care of himself alone, even when it meant living in a van, surviving on scraps. When they arrived at the shelter, Mason helped Ray get settled in. It was clean, quiet, and the staff was friendly. There were other veterans there too, men and women who understood what Ray had been through. Ray's shoulders seemed to relax as he sat down in a chair, looking around. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel out of place. He didn't feel like an outsider. That night, Mason received a call from the veterans organization. They had secured a meeting with a local job placement agency that specialized in helping veterans find work. It was the breakthrough Ray needed. But it wasn't just about a job. It was about giving him the opportunity to rebuild his life, to feel valued again. The next day, Mason and Ray sat down with a counselor from the job placement agency. They went over Ray's resume, and Mason was amazed at the skills Ray had developed during his time in the military. Ray had worked as a mechanic, a truck driver, and even had experience in construction. There were opportunities out there for him, real ones. Ray just needed a little nudge to get started. "I never thought I'd be able to do something like this again," Ray admitted, shaking his head as he looked over the job listings. I'm not the man I used to be." Mason placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ray, you've been through a lot, but you're still here. You're still standing. And that counts for more than anything." Ray smiled, a little unsure at first, but the glimmer of hope was starting to return. Over the next few weeks, Ray stayed at the shelter while Mason continued to help him navigate the process of applying for jobs. One day, Ray called Mason with some exciting news. He had been offered a position as a mechanic at a local shop. It wasn't a high-paying job, but it was a start, and that start was enough to give Ray something he hadn't had in years: purpose. As Ray started his new job, he began to rebuild his confidence. He had his own small apartment now, thanks to the money raised from the fundraiser. He wasn't living in a van anymore. He wasn't a homeless veteran. He was a man who had found his way back from the brink. But the most powerful change was in Ray himself. The weight of his past was still there, but he was no longer carrying it alone. Mason's support and the help of the people who had stepped in had made all the difference. Months passed, and Ray's life began to slowly piece itself together. His job as a mechanic gave him a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. Each day, as he worked on cars, he found himself reconnecting with the skills he had once used in the military, skills he thought he had lost. His hands, rough from years of labor, had found purpose again. And with that, Ray began to see hope where there had once only been darkness. But the road to healing wasn't an easy one. For all the progress Ray had made, there were still the scars from his past. Flashbacks of the war would come uninvited, sometimes in the middle of the night. The weight of the trauma he carried would resurface, and there were days when it felt as though the world was still closing in on him. But Ray didn't face it alone. He had Mason, and he had a community that cared. One evening after work, Mason took Ray out for dinner. They sat in a small, quiet restaurant in town. Ray had grown used to the ordinary things again, having a place to sit down for a meal, holding a conversation without feeling like an outsider. The warmth of the restaurant and the sound of other people's laughter felt normal. It felt like home. "You know, Mason," Ray said, his voice quiet as he pushed his food around on his plate, "I never thought I'd have a chance to live a normal life again. I thought the best days were behind me." Mason looked at him, a slight smile on his face. "Ray, your best days are still ahead of you. It's not about what's happened in the past. It's about what you're doing right now. You've come a long way." Ray nodded slowly. "I guess I'm starting to believe that." But it wasn't just the big changes that mattered. It was the small things, the moments when Ray would smile without hesitation, when he would laugh without a trace of worry. He was finding peace in his daily life, bit by bit. A few weeks later, Mason got a call from the Veterans Organization. They wanted to hold a small ceremony to honor Ray and other veterans for their resilience. It wasn't a huge event, but it meant a lot to Ray. It was a reminder that he wasn't invisible anymore, that the sacrifices he had made hadn't been forgotten. At the ceremony, Ray stood with his fellow veterans, his eyes scanning the crowd. There was no fanfare, no elaborate speeches, just a quiet acknowledgement of what they had all been through. As Ray listened to the words of gratitude spoken that day, he realized something important. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey. And it was one he would continue to walk, step by step, day by day. And for the first time in years, Ray felt like he had a future. It was a future full of challenges, but also full of possibilities. The man who had once been homeless, living in a van, was no longer defined by his past. He was defined by the choices he made now, and by the strength he had found in himself. As the ceremony came to an end, Ray turned to Mason, who had been standing by his side the entire time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on me." Mason smiled, a sense of pride in his heart. "Ray, you did all the work. You just needed someone to believe in you." And with that, Ray realized that his journey wasn't just about rebuilding his life. It was about rebuilding his belief in himself. As the months went on, Ray continued to heal, step by step, from the deep scars of his past. His life, once fractured by loss and trauma, was now beginning to take shape in ways he never thought possible. The small victories, finding stable work, a place to live, and rediscovering his own worth, began to add up. Each day felt like a new chapter, and Ray was determined to write his own story. One morning, while working at the mechanic shop, Ray received an unexpected phone call. It was from a local organization that helped veterans get back on their feet. They had heard about his story and wanted to offer him an opportunity to do something he had always dreamed of: starting his own small business. It was a chance to use his skills, his experience, and his passion for working with his hands to build a future. At first, Ray was skeptical. Starting a business felt like an impossible task. He had never thought of himself as someone who could run a company. But with Mason's encouragement and the support of the Veterans Organization, Ray decided to take a leap of faith. He applied for the small business loan they had offered, and, to his surprise, was approved. The weight of the moment was overwhelming, but in his heart, Ray knew it was the right step. "Are you sure about this?" Mason asked one evening as they sat together on Ray's porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I mean, starting a business, it's a lot to take on." Ray smiled, a quiet confidence in his eyes. "I've spent too many years sitting on the sidelines wondering if I could do something. I think it's time I find out." With Mason's unwavering support, Ray got to work. He spent long hours drafting a business plan, attending workshops on entrepreneurship, and learning the ins and outs of owning a company. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of setbacks, dealing with paperwork, getting the right permits, learning how to manage finances. But with each challenge, Ray grew stronger. He wasn't just building a business, he was building himself. Months passed, and Ray's mechanic shop officially opened its doors. It wasn't much at first, just a small space with a few tools and an old truck. But to Ray, it was everything. The shop became more than just a place of work. It was a symbol of everything he had overcome and everything he was still capable of. He was no longer the man living in a van on the side of the road, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. He was a man with a purpose, a man who had taken control of his future, and a man who had learned that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a way forward. Ray's story spread quickly through the community. People admired his resilience, his strength, and his willingness to take risks, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. And with each passing day, the shop became a symbol of hope for others who were struggling. Ray wasn't just fixing cars, he was fixing lives. One evening, as Ray closed up the shop, Mason stopped by to check on him. "How's it going?" he asked, leaning against the door frame. Ray wiped his hands on a rag, a grin spreading across his face. "It's going better than I could have ever imagined. I never thought I'd get here, but here I am, and it feels damn good." Mason clapped him on the back. "I knew you could do it. You just had to believe in yourself." And for the first time in a long while, Ray truly believed. He believed in his ability to overcome, to rise from the ashes of his past, and to create something meaningful. His journey was far from over, but it was one that he was no longer walking alone. As Ray's mechanic shop gained more recognition, his life continued to change in ways he never thought possible. The work was steady, the customers were loyal, and the pride he felt in what he had built was immeasurable. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about the community that had rallied around him. Ray knew that his success wasn't only his own. It was the product of every helping hand, every word of encouragement, and every person who believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. One quiet afternoon, while Ray was under the hood of a car, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Olivia, a social worker who had helped Ray during his time at the shelter. She had stayed in touch over the years, offering a kind word or a little support whenever she could. "Hey, Ray," Olivia called out, her voice warm as she stepped. Inside the shop, Ray stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Olivia, what brings you here?" "I was in the area and thought I'd check in on you," she said, her eyes scanning the shop with admiration. "I see you're doing well. This place looks great." Ray grinned. "It's a work in progress, but we're getting there." Olivia smiled, but then hesitated for a moment, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in helping someone else. There's a young vet I'm working with. His name is Chris. He's been struggling, and he's just about hit rock bottom. I think he could use a mentor, someone who's been where he is." Ray's heart tightened at the mention of another veteran in need. He thought about how far he had come, and how much support he had received from others. It felt right to give back, to help someone else find their way just as he had. "Of course, I'll help him," Ray said without hesitation. "I know what it feels like to feel lost, to think there's no way out. If I can make a difference for him, I will." The next day, Chris arrived at the shop. He was younger than Ray had been when he first started, but the same look of exhaustion and defeat was present in his eyes. He carried the weight of his own struggles, just like Ray had. But this time, there was someone who understood. Ray took Chris under his wing, showing him the ropes of the business and teaching him the skills he had learned over the years. At first, Chris was hesitant, unsure of his place, but Ray patiently guided him, offering advice, not just about work, but about life. He told Chris that it wasn't about how many times you fell, but about how many times you got back up. He shared his own story, the story of being homeless, of feeling hopeless, and how, with determination and the help of others, he had turned his life around. Days turned into weeks, and Chris began to open up. Ray watched as the young man slowly found his confidence, and it was like watching a reflection of himself from years ago. There was hope in Chris's eyes now, just as there had been in Ray's. And every day he was reminded that his journey wasn't just about personal success. It was about passing on the lessons he had learned to someone else who needed them. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Chris approached Ray with a look of gratitude. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said quietly. "I don't know where I'd be without you. You've given me more than a job. You've given me a chance." Ray smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. "You've got it in you, Chris. You just had to see it for yourself." As Chris continued to work at the shop, Ray couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. His own path had been long and difficult, but now he was helping someone else find their way. The feeling of giving back, of paying it forward, was more rewarding than anything he had achieved on his own. Months passed, and the shop continued to grow, becoming not just a business but a sanctuary for Ray and the people who worked with him. His small team of mechanics, including Chris, had become more like a family, each person contributing their skills and energy to the success of the business. The sense of camaraderie in the shop was undeniable, and it was clear that the work they did together went beyond just fixing cars. It was about rebuilding lives, one step at a time. Ray had made it through the toughest part of his life, but now he was living a purpose that far surpassed any material gain he could have imagined. He had a sense of belonging, a role to play, and a responsibility to the community that had supported him. Ray knew that his success wasn't just about being able to stand on his own. It was about lifting others up along the way. One chilly morning, as Ray was preparing to open the shop, Olivia called. Her voice was filled with excitement. "Ray, you're not going to believe this, but we've got some really good news." Ray raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's going on?" "Chris just got an offer for a scholarship to a vocational training program. It's a huge opportunity for him to expand his skills and work toward his dream of starting his own auto body business." Ray's heart swelled with pride. He had known this day would come. Chris had worked hard, learned everything Ray had taught him, and now he was ready for the next chapter. Ray could already picture Chris standing behind the counter of his own shop, making a difference in his own way, just as Ray had done. "That's incredible," Ray said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so proud of him. He's going to do great things." Olivia chuckled. "You're the one who helped him get to this point. He looks up to you, Ray. You've changed his life." Ray paused for a moment, taking in the weight of her words. He had never set out to be anyone's savior. He had just wanted to survive, to make it through another day. But now, he had become something much bigger than that. A mentor, a role model, and a symbol of hope. As Chris prepared for his new journey, Ray found himself reflecting on his own path. From the streets, from being homeless, to now watching someone else take the next step toward a better future. It felt like a full-circle moment. He knew that he had made the right decision all those years ago, when he had chosen to fight for a better life. Every struggle, every hardship had been worth it. Because now, he was living a life that mattered, not just to him, but to others as well. On the day Chris left for his vocational program, Ray stood outside the shop and waved him off, watching as the young man drove away in his own car. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. Ray knew that the future was bright for Chris, just as it had been for him. And as he turned to head back inside the shop, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment, a deep, soul-satisfying realization that he had not only turned his own life around, but he had helped someone else do the same. Ray smiled as he walked back to his workbench, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He had found his purpose, and he knew that the best was yet to come. Ray had come a long way since those early days. The man who had once slept in his van, living from day to day, now stood in his own shop, the heart of the community. People came in not just to get their cars fixed, but to see Ray. They came for his wisdom, his advice, and his quiet strength. Ray had unknowingly become a beacon of hope for those around him, a reminder that it was never too late to change, to start fresh. On a quiet afternoon, as Ray was wrapping up the last repair of the day, Olivia walked into the shop with a big smile on her face. Her excitement was palpable. "Ray, you won't believe it. The city has recognized your business," she said, holding a certificate in her hand. Ray raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "They're giving you an award for outstanding community service." Olivia handed him the certificate, and Ray looked at it in surprise. It was a simple recognition, but for Ray, it meant everything. It meant that his work had not only helped himself, but had made a difference in the lives of those around him. Ray stood still for a moment, looking at the award in his hands. He had never expected recognition. When he'd started, all he wanted was a way to survive. But this was something different. This was validation that his struggles had been worthwhile. His hard work had paid off, not just for him, but for the people who had come to rely on him. As he looked around the shop, he saw the faces of the people who had helped him along the way. Olivia, Chris, the customers who believed in him. It was in those faces that Ray realized something profound. He was no longer just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for something greater. He was building a future, not just for himself, but for the entire community that had embraced him. That evening, Ray stood outside the shop, looking up at the night sky. The streetlights flickered, casting a warm glow over the city, and for the first time in a long time, Ray felt at peace. He had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for: a sense of belonging. The path he had walked hadn't been easy. There had been dark days, days when he didn't know if he could keep going. But now, as he stood there, the weight of those struggles seemed to lift. Ray had come full circle. He was no longer a man living in a van, struggling to survive. He was a man with a purpose, a business, and a future. His life had meaning, not just because of what he had accomplished, but because of the people he had helped along the way. And as Ray looked down at the certificate in his hand, he knew that the best was yet to come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, and he was ready for whatever the future held. Ray's story isn't just about overcoming hardship. It's about transforming pain into power and using that power to uplift others. His journey proves that no matter where you start, no matter how dark the days may seem, there's always a chance for change. Ray's story is a reminder that the future belongs to those who dare to dream and work for it. And just like that, everything changed for them. One small act of kindness can ripple through lives in ways we can't always predict. What happened next for this remarkable person will leave you thinking about the power we all have to make a difference. Remember, no good deed goes unnoticed, and sometimes the world just needs a little help from each of us. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe for more real-life tales of kindness, hope, and inspiration. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll dive even deeper into the lives of those whose stories need to be told. Don't miss it.